And we're recording.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started with the technical guidance training series on IEC. My name is George Nicholas. I'm with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Bureau of Groundwater Pollution Assessment. I am also working with the training program as well as overseeing the development of the guidance documents. This morning, I just wanted to give you a few. Can you advance the slide more? I got one. Just a few logistics. The slides were sent out yesterday for everybody who had registered for the session. If you had registered after that point, you can email us using the GoToMeeting email address that was provided, and we would be glad to send you a set of the slides. In addition to that, we have the question function turned off right now. Reason for that is lots of people ask questions and then their questions are answered later on with the slides that are coming up. So during the question and answer period, we will turn that function on and we would encourage people to ask questions. I'll read those questions and the appropriate presenter will try to get you an answer. If at the end of the question and answer period, because we only have 10 minutes, if we don't answer those questions, we'll make sure that we record them and get questions out to people. We do have your contact information. And our intent is to get everyone answers to their questions. Just wanted to note that this program is sponsored by the department as well as the LSRPA. In addition to that, there will be an evaluation form at the end of this program. We would encourage you to fill that out. That's how we improve the program, and we certainly appreciate your feedback on that. Just to go over the agenda quickly. This morning I'll just be giving a welcome, and then actually Mark Fisher will be doing the LSRPA overview in place of Dan Toder. I'll be giving a brief overview for technical guidance. After that, Drew Seitz will be giving us an overview for the IEC concepts. Mark Fisher will be doing IEC regulatory process, and then we're going to have a 10-minute question and answer period. After that, Drew is going to give us a presentation on IEC resources. And then after that, we're going to have an overview on vapor intrusion. Drew Seitz will actually be sitting in for John Boyer on that particular section. And then Mark Fisher is going to give us some information on IEC case studies. Actually, that was very well received on our last presentation, so we're looking forward to that. And then Drew Seitz will be wrapping it up with just a short presentation on IEC program status. After that, we'll have a second question and answer period. We would invite your questions at that point. Just to give you a brief background on our presenters today, just so that you know why they are presenting, and they do have a background to do that. Drew Seitz is a professional engineer. He has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Lehigh University and an MBA from Rider University. He's been with the department for over 24 years as a project manager for both IEC and Superfund cases, and is currently a supervisor of the IEC section within the site remediation program. He's also the co-chair for the IEC Technical Guidance Committee, and he's involved with both LSRP as well as publicly funded IEC cases. Mark Fisher, who will also be presenting, is an LSRP. He's a principal with ELM's Princeton office. He has over 25 years experience in environmental risk management and multimedia site remediation, including regulatory program management, contaminated site redevelopment. Mark is a member of the board of directors for the New Jersey LSRP Association, and he's involved in numerous LSRP-related regulatory and guidance committees. His prior regulatory experience includes 10 years with the NJDEP site remediation program in the underground storage tank and ISRA programs, and he received his Bachelor of Science degree from Richard Stockton College of New Jersey. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Fisher. He's going to give the LSRPA overview.
Good morning, folks. As George mentioned, this is Mark Fisher with ELM. I'm also a member of the board of directors with the LSRP Association. And this is just a brief overview of the association, a little commercial for what it is that we do and what we try to do to help our membership out there. The association does have annual sponsors, and these sponsors help fund the training programs that we do, both the ones we do in coordination with the NJDEP, and also we've done a number of external training sessions throughout the past year and a half. So all these folks here, Accutest Laboratories, AWT Environmental, Borba Surveying, East Coast Drilling, EST Remediation, Hampton Clark Veritech, and Riker Danzig are all monetary sponsors of the association, so we want to thank them for their participation and sponsorship in the program. So I joined the LSRPA. We try to service folks that are not only LSRPs but non-LSRPs that are practicing in the state of New Jersey that will have involvement with site remediation projects, which will include a large community going forward. And the membership dues, although there is a membership fee, annual membership fee, in the end of the day, you can actually save money through the due structure because there's a discount for our training sessions that we run throughout the year. And those discounts actually would result in, if you take all the training sessions, a wash on your membership dues. So it is a good way to offset that if you participate in the training. There's also a lot of networking opportunities. Most of the folks in the association are pretty active in the subcommittees that we've been doing over the past year and a half, working with the department and working also with the membership and other folks to develop policy, feedback, and training opportunities for the membership. Professional development, obviously, with the training sessions that we run, it's been very helpful. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on that. You're listed in our LSRP Association directory. We also have now on our website a members-only web portal. You can go to our website, the lsrpa.org website, and you can kind of see what the association is all about, what our objectives are, what we're trying to do to serve our membership. And within the members-only portal, we have access for our membership to things that are happening. The association is involved in not only committees, but information with regard to the ongoing LSRP board meetings, some feedback on that, and relatively timely. We have information with regard to our association committees and subcommittees are posting minutes on there, and we're providing opportunities for members to comment on rule proposals and guidance documents and trying to get coordinated comments to the department on those things. And we've definitely, the association's been pretty active, obviously, with the department as the LSRP program has been moving forward. One of the things that moving forward in the LSRP program, there's a lot of things, obviously, that are going on out there, not only just from a technical and regulatory perspective, but procedurally, the program is still kind of under development. So we really try to keep current on what's going on, both from an administrative and a procedural perspective in terms of how LSRPs are going to practice, as well as from a technical and regulatory perspective. So it's one of the things that I think the association has done a pretty decent job of keeping current on that and trying to provide those types of that information and feedback to the membership. From a committee perspective, we've been very active. We've sort of organized ourselves with the following primary committees within the association, and we're always looking for members to participate in these committees. These committees have produced either working with the DEP and the guidance committees and regulatory committees, as well as doing internal preparation of documents that help our members. So the Regulatory Outreach Committee handles the technical and regulatory issues. Risk management and loss prevention deals with a lot of contractual things, insurance issues, general risk management in terms of practicing as an LSRP. We have a licensing board committee, legal and legislative committee, continuing education, communication, membership, nominating, and bylaws, and those are all the contact folks there. If you go to our website, there's additional information on how to contact those individuals if you want to participate in any of those committees. And even within the regulatory outreach, there's numerous subcommittees. These subcommittees are essentially aligned along with the department's work groups that they've established with the stakeholder process. And again, we've been pretty active with folks in the association with regard to participating in the stakeholder process and getting feedback to the department. It's been a pretty good collaborative process over the last year and a half. How to become a member? You can register online at our website, lsrpa.org, or you can physically send in a registration form. Membership fees, regular membership for LSRPs is $150. You can be an associate member. You don't have to be an LSRP as well. The only difference between the two is there's certain, you can't serve on the board of directors. You can't be one of the officers. You can be on the board, but you can't serve as one of the officers on the association board. And then we have a student opportunity for students to participate in the association at no charge. And again, I think if you register now, you get the rest of this year free, and your $150 covers 2012. So that's a little bit about the association. We encourage everybody to get involved, and if you have any questions, certainly you can go to our website and contact the individuals listed there. With that, I will turn it back over to George.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Right now we're just going to provide a quick overview of the technical guidance committees and the documents and how they were prepared. As everyone knows, the initiative that the department's currently going under is pretty complicated, and it's a lot of work is going into balancing the initiation or the establishment of the LSRP program, the writing of technical guidance, and as well as coordinating that with the rules that are being rewritten currently. That's been quite an operation. A lot of the guidance committees have really struggled with not only looking at the current tech rule and how we write guidance for that, but what that role is going to look like in the future and positioning ourselves to revise those technical guidance documents, which is really what we're going to have to do in May of 2012 when the tech rules hopefully go final at that point. So the technical guidance committees were composed of DEP staff and outside stakeholders. The outside stakeholders consisted of representatives from responsible parties and site owners, LSRPA consultants, or LSRP consultants, members of other associations such as the Chemistry Council or the Builders Association. And their idea was to bring a little bit more balance to the table when we were writing those documents. One thing that the department was not successful in, and perhaps we should try to do a little bit better job, is to get environmental groups to come to the table as well. There's some issues with that, and we're trying to work around them, but we certainly would have liked to have them at the table, providing an additional perspective. The technical guidance committees were tasked with looking at the technical rule requirements, identifying prescriptive or performance requirements, and taking out the how-to from the tech regs and moving that into guidance so that the tech regs really have performance objectives in them, and the guidance has how to achieve those. The committees had to coordinate with the tech rule committee, just in identifying those and assisting the tech rule committee, and also writing the new tech rules in talking about what information was taken out of the tech regs, what information was going into guidance, and coordinating on that. And then the technical committees had to also develop training, which is what we're doing here today. And that's an additional task. Definitely a lot of work has gone into that, and I think the committees have done an excellent job so far in that respect. This is just to remind you again, the rules were performance objectives. That is the what, and that is what must be accomplished. And then the guidance is really how we achieve those regulatory requirements. The guidance is scientifically based, identifies technical and scientific approaches that are acceptable to the DEP. So basically, if you follow what's in the guidance, that would be an acceptable approach for the DEP. What I probably would point out is that there have been questions in regard to deviation from guidance and also variance from rules. The old tech regs or the existing tech regs right now treat those as the same thing. However, we recognize that variance from rules in 1.7 of the current tech regs, it identifies the requirements for obtaining a variance. But as far as deviation from guidance, that was kind of outlined in SARO, where it directs us to just justify when we deviate from guidance and still outline how it's still protective. So the idea is we recognize that. We will use our enforcement discretion. And so deviation from guidance will not require the same requirements as variants from tech rule will. So why did we go through this stakeholder input? Well, Sarah directed the department to do that, to follow a stakeholder process, but I think it's a lot more than that. The collaboration that really has helped the department write those rules, helped us consensus building, and I think it also provided a lot more balance to the guidance documents. A lot of thought went into those. There was different perspectives that were brought to the table, and I think that it created a much more balanced and robust document than if the department had worked on those documents alone. In addition to that, there is improved working relationships. There's a lot of, in my experience in working with all the committees, I think there was a lot of respect between the department and the outside stakeholders, and the fact that we all eventually could see that the main goal really was to write a guidance document that we could all use and support. In addition to that, there was a review process that allowed the document to be reviewed and feedback obtained by a much greater audience than just the committee members, and I think that was a good process for us getting feedback and being able to modify the documents accordingly. And I think that was a definite plus. In addition to that, the information exchange with the development of the training, I think, is allowing us to reach a broader sector of the environmental community, and hopefully to get this information out so that there's a little bit less confusion. The number of guidance committees, there's actually 16. They're listed right here. The ones that are underlined with an asterisk are guidance committees that have issued their documents final, and they are posted on the DEP-SRP guidance library. That guidance library actually, if it is not already, I haven't checked this morning, but that is also being revised a little bit to make it a little bit user-friendly. But these documents will be up there for downloading and accessing. And that's it. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Drew Seitz, and he will go into, I think you're going to just let us know what we're doing, the concepts.
Okay. Thanks, George. I'm Drew Seitz. I'm the supervisor of the IEC group in the site remediation program. And what we're going to cover in this training is we're going to give you an overview of the IEC concepts. Mark will get into the regulatory process. We'll have resources that will help you work through your IEC case. And we have a refresher course on vapor intrusion. And then Mark's got a really good case study where this all gets pulled together. And we'll finish off with the program status, what's happened in almost the last 2 years. I'm going to start off with an overview of the IEC concept. I'm going to give you the big picture, and as we go through this talk, we're going to get more and more specific. What we're talking about today is the new IEC guidance. The IEC guidance was written by DEP almost, I guess, about 2 years ago, and that was revised, and it was posted on the SRP website about 2 weeks ago. So that's what we're going to be going through today. Before any revisions took place, a committee was formed, and this committee was comprised of both DEP staff and stakeholders. Everybody that was on the committee is listed here. We had 10 folks. 4 of them were from DEP. 6 of them were stakeholders. Of the 6 stakeholders, 1 represented the regulated community, and the rest were LSRPs. We went through the original document, and we literally went line by line. It took us over a year, and we came up with a new draft document. One of the things I wanted to really point out is that, particularly for the stakeholders, they put in a lot of time here. They brought their perspective and their experience, and they really added a lot to this process. And unfortunately, in the process of working on this, they gave up a lot of billable hours. The department really does appreciate all the work they put into it, and I think we came out with a very well-balanced document. When we did come up with a draft document, we weren't done yet. That document was circulated to interested parties or the general public, and we received 170 comments. The committee came back together. We went through all the comments. We responded to them. We made changes to the document. Then the document was finalized. That's what is currently posted on the SRP website. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll start off with the basics. What is an IEC? For you to have an IEC, you need to have three conditions. You need to have a contaminant source in the environment, you need to have a contaminant migration pathway, and an impacted receptor. If you have all three, you may have an IEC condition. If you don't, you may have a problem, but it's just not an IEC. So you need to have each one of these three conditions, and we'll get into detail what each one of these are in a few minutes. There are three types of IECs. We have contaminated potable wells, vapor intrusion, and direct contact. The trigger levels for each one of these IECs is listed here. For potable water, you need to exceed the groundwater remediation levels to trigger an IEC. For vapor intrusion, this was a somewhat recent change. The trigger level is now the rapid action levels. And for direct contact, you need to exceed an acute health effect level. Okay, the basic concept behind handling IECs, and this is really, if you boil everything down that we're going to talk about today, it comes down to these 3 points. If you trigger an IEC, you need to go out, delineate the IEC problem, you need to remediate the IEC problems that you find, and you need to remove the source that caused the IEC problem in the first place. If you do trigger an IEC, there's a chance that there are additional receptors that are in the immediate area. That's why you need to step out, do some additional sampling, see if you have any other IEC receptors. If you do find additional IEC receptors, you need to provide remediation. And then the last portion of the whole IEC process is starting to remove the source that caused the IEC problem. The concept here is that if you have a significant source which is continuing to discharge the environment, that you need to start removing that, because if it's continuing to discharge, the contamination is continuing to spread and impact more receptors. When we're talking about sources in this case, what we're really talking about are things like leaking underground storage tanks, heavily contaminated soils, things that are continuing to discharge to the environment, something we can go in there, pump out a tank, dig up the soil. What we're not talking about is a dissolved groundwater plume. That's obviously going to take you more than a year to address. So everything comes down to these 3 concepts. What are some of the big components of the IEC process that you should be aware of? Every IEC case is going to get a case manager. This is different than most of the rest of the LSRP program, but IECs are important enough that you will have an IEC case manager. That case manager will only be working with you on the IEC component. Now, all the case managers that are in my group have over 20 years of experience dealing with IECs. So when you call them up, they have been doing similar work that you're doing. We've handled contaminated groundwater cases, vapor intrusion. They've been through a lot of your same problems. So when you're looking for help, you have questions, you will be dealing with experienced case managers. When you read through the guidance, you're going to notice that you have expedited timeframes for rapid response. They're much shorter timeframes than in the rest of the LSRP program that's listed in the tech regs. The reason being for the rapid response is that we actually have impacted receptor, people who are drinking contaminated water, breathing contaminated air. That's why your timeframes are short. If you trigger a new case, that new case will go to the IEC group. If you have been working on an existing case, you're going to continue working with your case manager, whether that's in BUST or ISRA, and they will handle the IEC case for you. However, come May 2012, that will change. All IEC cases will be in the IEC group. The LSRP or the consultant must work closely with the case manager. This is something you're going to be hearing throughout this talk. It's very important that you keep your case manager up to date on what you're doing with your project. And then finally, most of the work is going to be based on verbal approvals with email confirmation. Your timeframes are way too short to be mailing things back and forth. That's why you're just going to be talking with your case manager. When you come to a resolution on how you're going to handle a particular issue, you're going to document that in an email and send it to your case manager or vice versa. Okay, for the IEC guidance. When you read through this, keep in mind that the guidance was written for basic types of IEC conditions and sensitive receptors. When we say sensitive receptors, we mean impacted residential homes, daycare centers, and schools. If you have one of these sensitive receptors, we are going to expect you to meet the IEC timeframes. However, we do realize that there are more complicated cases like dealing with strip malls with dry cleaners. We have them in the publicly funded program. It does take you more time to handle those, and we do have provisions for giving you time extensions. When you read the guidance, it is a little bit different than some of the other guidances because the committee thought that it would be beneficial to have both the rule and the guidance in the same document. The reason being is that your time frames are short, you need to respond quickly. We thought it would be difficult for the LSRP to have the rule in one hand and the guidance in the other and trying to see how they mesh. So we actually put both together. But we wanted to be able to show you what rule was and what guidance was. The way that we did that was that anytime we refer to the rule, we use the word shall. And when we're referring to rule, you're going to see shall. Like an example would be, you shall call the hotline immediately when you find an IEC. After that, we also put in the citation for the rule. So that's how you'll know if you're dealing with a rule. Guidance, we use the word should. It would be you should call the property owner to give them test results. So that's how we worked out having rule and guidance in the guidance document. Frequent communication and information sharing with the case manager is really vital. You have to meet these tight time frames. If you have problems, you should be communicating that with your case manager. If you need time extensions, again, talk with your case manager. It's important that you keep them up to date. Like I said in the beginning of this slide, there are more complicated cases where you will need time extensions, and there are a provision for requesting time extensions. What's the difference between rules and guidance? When we're saying rules, we're referring to the tech rules. When you read the guidance, again, we say you shall do something. You must comply with the requirements of the rules. However, guidance, that's a little different. You need to follow the guidance, but you can use professional judgment with adequate justification. If there's something a guidance that you feel that you can't follow, it doesn't fit your situation, and you're not going to do it, or you're proposing something different, you do need to provide adequate justification to your case manager. Okay. Mark is going to be talking about time frames, and there's two kinds of time frames. There's regulatory and mandatory time frames. Most of what you're going to hear are regulatory time frames. All regulatory time frames are in the tech rules. The start date for existing cases which were existing before November 2009, that was for existing cases, the start date was November 2009. Any cases that were discovered after November 2009, the start date for regulatory timeframes is the date of discovery of the IEC. And we also have mandatory timeframes. For IECs, there's only one mandatory timeframe. That mandatory timeframe is listed in the ARCS rule. The start date for existing cases, these were cases that were pre-November 2009, is March 1st, 2010. The mandatory time frame is 2 years for all IECs. If we're talking about a new case, the start date for a mandatory time frame is also the date of discovery of the IEC. Now, there are time frame extensions that can be requested for both regulatory and mandatory time frames. How do you get an extension for a regulatory time frame? You need to submit a remediation time frame extension request form to your case manager or the Bureau of Initial Notice. This has to be done 30 days before the due date. So if you have a report that's due in 120 days, you got to do it 30 days before that. When you do submit this form, you're going to need to provide the rationale for the extension and a new schedule, a new proposed schedule. If it's approved, you won't receive a response. What we're going to do is we're going to update our database, and that will reflect your new time frame that you received the extension for. If it is not approved, you will get a rejection letter from the department. Now, with regulatory time frames, one of the things to note is that you can get extensions, but you cannot get extensions for regulatory time frames that are going to push you beyond your mandatory time frame, which is 2 years. Okay. How do you get an extension for a mandatory time frame? It's very similar to the regulatory. You're going to submit a remediation time frame extension request form. Again, it's to your case manager, your initial notice, but this time you need to do this within 60 days before your due date. Your due date is 2 years, so 60 days before your two-year timeline. Again, you need to provide rationale for your extension. You need to provide a new schedule for completing the work, and in this case, the department will provide you a written notification either way, if it was approved or denied. Okay, what is the role of the LSRP and the IEC case manager in this whole IEC process? Well, the role for the LSRP is that they're going to address the IEC by following the rules and the guidance. Now, Mark is going to get into all the details of what needs to be done in those timelines, but from the case manager's perspective, the case is really the LSRPs, and they just need to progress along with the timelines, get the work done. For the IEC case manager, their role is a role of oversight. We're going to be tracking the case to make sure the work's being done. One of the things to note that the case manager's time will be direct billed to the RP. This is slightly different than the rest of the whole LSRP program. So when you're working with your case manager, keep that in mind. When they're requesting information provided to them, if they have to pull it together themselves, they're going to be billing you extra time for that. The other role for them is to answer questions. We do expect the LSRPs to be knowledgeable about the rules and the guidance. However, there are plenty of gray areas. Your case manager is there to answer questions. If you have a situation where you have a new IEC, you don't have a case manager yet, you're always free to give me a call and we can discuss your case. The case manager is also going to evaluate time extension requests. They'll evaluate deviations from the guidance, and they will be documenting the progress or lack of progress of the case. We have a database system, and most people not in DEP know it as data miner, and we will be tracking if when work is being done. If work isn't being done, it'll also be shown, so anybody can look it up and see the progress of the case. If there is a problem with the IEC case, things are not progressing, the case manager can initiate enforcement, and if need be, and there's non-compliance, the IEC case manager is going to take on the role of handling the case using public funds. When we do have non-compliance with the rules, the case will be referred to enforcement, and the IEC case manager will take over and use public funds to address the receptors and conduct receptor delineation. The department is not going to wait and try to resolve issues with receptors. If you have a situation where the responsible party maybe goes bankrupt, there's no more money to pay the LSRP to do the work, this would be just one example where the department would step in and address the receptors. A couple of things you should be aware of is that if there are problems with the LSRP, the department does not take action against the LSRP. The department can refer the LSRP to the licensing board, and the licensing board takes actions against the LSRP. If there are enforcement problems, the department will take enforcement action against the responsible party. Just so you know, the base penalty for violation for not complying with IEC requirements is $20,000. Now, there have been significant changes since we started the whole IEC program back in November of 2009. And those changes occurred because there was a revision to the tech rules. The current tech rules that you should be using are dated February 2011. And in those tech rules, there were changes which impacted IECs. The main changes actually gave you more time to respond to IECs. I'm going to have listed here some of the changes. For submitting the IEC information, that requirement was changed from 5 days to 14 days. The regulatory requirement for starting source control and submitting a source control report was extended from 270 days to 1 year. And then the mandatory time frame for source control and reporting was changed from 1 year to 2 years. So these changes came about because of the revised tech rules. Now, there was also other changes in the tech rules which affected vapor intrusion. The first one, your interim response action, this is for VI only, was extended from 5 days to 14 days. That gives you some more time to provide an interim response action. One of the big changes that happened for VI was that the trigger level for an IEC for vapor intrusion was changed from the indoor air screening level to the rapid action levels. So now you need to exceed a rapid action level to have an IEC. One of the other additions in the new rule was that a new category of VI case was created. We call that a vapor concern case, or we're going to be referring to it as a VC. This case is triggered when you have an exceedance of the indoor air screening levels up to and including the rapid action level. So now you have two different types of VI cases. You have VCs and IEC cases. And Mark will be getting into to more of those details. I'm going to turn it over to him now, and he's going to get into the specifics of the IEC process.
Okay, as Drew mentioned, this part of the presentation is going to drill down into the regulatory process. Specifically, we're going to be talking a lot about the specific time frames for each of the categories of the different IECs and what the basic requirements are for satisfying those regulatory time frames. Essentially, you can think of it as three categories of regulatory timeframes that you have to be concerned about when you have an IEC, and also we'll talk a little bit about the category of sites that Drew mentioned for vapor concern sites as well, so you get familiar with those regulatory timeframes. But the basic categories are the potable and direct contact IEC timeframes, the vapor intrusion timeframes, and then the vapor concern sites. So for regulatory timeframes for the first category for potable and direct contact, what we have listed here are the basic regulatory timeframes that are currently in the rule. And there are 6 that you need to be aware of. First is the immediate notification to the hotline once you identify your IEC condition, and we'll talk a little bit later about what that actually means. When are you obligated to make that notification for your IEC condition? Then within 5 days, you've got to take your interim response action. Within 14 days, you've got your first information submittal to the department. Within 60 days, your engineered system response and your receptor delineation needs to be completed. And again, we'll talk as we go through the presentation today about what each of those specific requirements entail. The 5th time frame is within 120 days. You have an engineered system response action report that needs to be submitted to the department. And then within 1 year, you have to have initiated your source control and submitted your source control report. And that is the regulatory time frame that also has an associated mandatory time frame. That is really the only mandatory time frame that's associated with the IEC category, but it is something that carries significant ramifications if you fail to meet that time frame. For vapor intrusion sites, slightly different, and we'll do a quick comparison when we're done talking about the specifics, but for the purposes of vapor intrusion, you've got 5 regulatory time frames that are established. Obviously, the first one is the immediate notification of the hotline and your DEP case manager if you have one. Within 14 days, you have to have conducted your interim response action, and then you also have to submit your first information submittal to the department at that point. And then after that, the time frames sync up with the potable and direct contact IEC. 60 days for the completion of your engineered system response action and your receptor delineation. 120 days to submit your engineered system response action report, and 1 year for your initiation of source control and submission of your source control report. And again, similarly with the vapor intrusion sites, it has the corollary mandatory time frame. This timeline is sort of a simplified way of looking at the two time frames that are sort of intertwined when you're talking about IEC conditions. Usually you've encountered an IEC condition, not always, but the majority of the time, you've encountered an IEC condition because you've moved through the receptor evaluation process. We're not going to go into that in any meaningful detail today, but that's a separate component in subchapter 1 of the tech rules, which leads you up to evaluating receptors and conducting, if necessary, potable well or subslab and indoor air sampling, which could put you into the IEC category. So what this does, this time frame, is kind of overlay your receptor timeline with the situation where you identify an IEC condition and the time frames for, in this instance, it's a potable water scenario. As we mentioned earlier, the time frames for the VIs are slightly different with the upfront requirements, but essentially you can see how the two timelines overlap here in what your obligations are as you trigger those conditions. So a quick comparison, what are the major differences between the VI and the potable well direct contact time frames? For the VI, and this was something that was changed, as Drew mentioned, in the rule more recently, both the interim response action, your completion of that interim response action and the submission of the information is due in 14 days. Conversely, for potable water and direct contact, your interim response action needs to be completed within 5 days of identifying the IEC condition, and then your information comes in 14 days later, and then all the other time frames that we talked about earlier are similar. So a little bit more detail now into each of the specific requirements for the regulatory time frames. So day one, you've identified your IEC condition. And we'll talk a little bit later, and there was a question in the last session about when have you, quote, confirmed your IEC condition. And the guidance document speaks to that from the standpoint of the LSRP, or responsible party, once they obtain final data from the lab, be it potable well or indoor air sampling results, once that data is received final from the laboratory and you have exceedances of any of the criteria, that's your obligation to notify the hotline. There was a question with regard to whether or not oftentimes labs will submit preliminary data that has not either been fully validated by the lab or you haven't received the data package yet. That is not considered an obligation at that point, but if it's obvious, you can certainly call the hotline, but if you want to wait till you get the final data package, that's clarified in the guidance document. So in addition to notifying the hotline, if you have an assigned SRP case manager, you also have to notify the case manager at that time. Additionally, if you have a unknown source IEC, and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about exactly what that is, you also have an obligation to notify the hotline. When you make that notification, it's important to make the distinction to the hotline operator that this is an unknown source IEC, although it was identified during the investigation of your specific site, the information or the evidence has been identified that sufficiently characterizes this as an unknown source IEC, and then the department will take further action with regard to that. But it is important to note that you do have an obligation to make that notification. The 5-day requirement for this is for the potable well and direct contact IECs. Within 5 days, you need to complete your interim response action. Now, the most typical examples for interim response actions for potable water scenarios are providing the occupant with bottled water. That's the most common interim response action. If you have a direct contact IEC, usually it's just some sort of quick engineering mechanism to preclude that contact, and typically that would involve fencing. Additionally, within 5 days, you need to notify the property owner, the township, and the local health department, and the details for that are also specified in the guidance document, but that's all within your 5-day requirement. 14-day regulatory requirement. Again, we're still talking about potable and direct contact IECs. This is your first information submittal to the department, and there's several components to that. Drew will be talking about that a little bit later in his presentation about the most effective ways to get this information to the department. But essentially, you've got a NJDEP response action form that needs to be prepared and submitted, an IEC spreadsheet for your data and site information for each of the IEC receptors, a map of the site and the IEC condition, and then submission of your analytical results with your data deliverables. For the submission of this information, you need to submit a paper copy and an electronic copy via email to the Bureau of Initial Notice and to Bureau of Initial Notice and Case Assignment. That's one bureau. And also, this is when your IEC case manager is going to be assigned by DEP, and there'll probably be either a phone call or an email contact from the department once the IEC case manager is assigned, so you can start your dialogue with that individual. For VIs, your 14-day requirement, the difference here again is with instead of 5 days, you have 14 days to complete your interim response action. And typically, the typical examples for VI IECs for interim response actions are, if it's appropriate, you can complete some ventilation or modifications to the HVAC system. That often is an acceptable interim response action. If there are obvious cracks in the basement or slab of the structure that's been affected, or there are sumps that are directly serve as a direct conduit between the subsurface vapors and the structure, those are usually quick and easy ways to address potentially mitigating those in an interim basis. So at the same time, within that 14 days to get that work completed, you also have the information submittal that's due, and those are the same basic requirements that we talked about earlier for the potable and the direct contact IEC, the submission of the form, the spreadsheet, maps, and the data. Submission of the information in hard copy and electronic copy to the Bureau of Case Assignment. And again, this is when your IEC case manager gets assigned. For the 60-day regulatory requirement, now we're talking about all IECs going forward. Within 60 days, you need to identify your additional receptors. For your potable and VI IECs, it's identification of additional potable wells, and for your VIs, it's the identification of the additional structures that could potentially be impacted. You have to complete your sampling. Also keep in mind, I didn't mention this earlier, but there's also notification requirements that the department has. There's a form that's required to be submitted as well that notifies the department of indoor air sampling or potable well sampling that's going to happen at the specific receptors. Also within 60 days, you need to complete your engineered system response action. Now this is the essentially the remedial system that will, or the remedial strategy that will mitigate your IEC condition on a more permanent basis. It's not necessarily associated with the remediation of the contamination that's causing the problem. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's more about mitigating the receptor condition. And the most common ones for your potable wells scenarios are the installation of a POET system, point of treatment system, or if you can get it done in 60 days, a waterline connection. For VI IECs, the most common one that's used is a subslab depressurization system. And again, these need to be in place within 60 days. This is obviously one of those things where there can be difficulty in accomplishing this. We recognize that. I think the department recognizes that. So verbal communication with your IEC case manager should be ongoing. So if there's a concern with regard to meeting the 60-day time frame, you need to be thinking about getting your extension requests in and making sure you have adequate justification to support that extension request. The next regulatory time frame is the 120-day requirement. Again, this is for all the categories of IECs. This is when you're going to submit your engineered system response action report. This will detail the mitigation system that we just talked about, be it a POET system or a subslab depressurization system. This will provide the department with basic details of what was specifically done. There is a specific remedial action form that the DEP has developed that needs to be submitted. You also need to describe in this report what you've done to satisfy your receptor delineation and receptor controls as part of this process. So what have you done with regard to your specific step outs? What are the sampling results that have been completed to satisfy that? And as part of all that, you update your IEC spreadsheet. Drew will go through that in a subsequent presentation. You can see how all that will work, and it's designed to sort of be an iterative process so that you can continually update the spreadsheet, and it's not a huge labor of effort if you get started with it from the get-go. Also, you need to update your IEC map, and there's also some GIS data submission and map submission requirements that are associated with this 120-day report. The last regulatory time frame is at the 1-year mark. At this point, all your delineation of your delineation of your IEC source should be completed. Meaning, what is causing the primary condition, or what's the primary source problem that's causing the IEC condition? That needs to be fully identified and delineated at this point. Again, it's not necessarily delineation of every contaminant of concern in every media at your site. It really focuses on the IEC source issue. You also have to initiate source control, and we'll talk a little bit later about what that means. It's a somewhat ambiguous definition purposely, but the concept here, as Drew mentioned earlier, is if you have a significant contaminant source that's feeding the IEC condition, free product, significant soil contamination that's readily accessible, or if you've got a leaking underground storage tank that's causing the problem. At this point, that source control needs to be initiated. It doesn't need to be completed, but needs to be initiated. And again, this is one of the conditions that you need to satisfy, where communication with your IEC case manager is going to be key to ensure that you're not putting yourself in a non-compliance condition by doing something that you think satisfies the definition of initiating source control, but the department may have a different opinion on that. So communication is key there. So also within this year, this is when you're submitting your IEC source control report, which will detail specifically what are you doing with regard to this source control activity. And there's an additional form that needs to be submitted, a response action form the DEP's created. You need to update your spreadsheet, update your maps, update your GIS submission. And also at this point, this is when you're going to submit a monitoring and maintenance plan. And this doesn't have to be painfully detailed, but it needs to identify how you're going to continue to monitor the effectiveness of what you've done to mitigate the IEC condition at all the various receptors that have been impacted, in terms of monitoring the efficacy of your system. If you put a subslab depressurization system or a POET system on, what you're doing to ensure that the system's operating properly, including either, if it's required, performance sampling, as well as sampling of the potable well and or indoor air if it's applicable. For vapor concerns, this is the category, relatively new category that was established for VI sites where you don't have an IEC condition, but you have an exceedance of the indoor air screening level, and you're into this vapor concern category, there are regulatory timeframes that have been established for these sites. There are no mandatory timeframes that are associated with this, but the regulatory timeframes are spelled out here, and they're a little bit different than the VI IEC conditions. They give you some more time, and they're less onerous. But essentially, you've got 4 categories of regulatory timeframes. The first is the 14-day. Once you identify your VC condition, you need to submit the Vapor Concern Response Action Form. It's a DEP form. Within 60 days, you're going to submit a mitigation plan, and the mitigation plan is something that the details will be presented in the BI guidance document, but there's also some online information that's available right now to establish that, and I think we talk a little bit in the guidance document about what that is, but even though it's technically not an IEC, your mitigation plan is essentially what you're going to do to respond to this vapor concern condition. Then within 120 days, you have to implement that mitigation plan, and then within 180 days, you need to submit a mitigation report, which essentially details what you did to implement that plan. These are not plans where you'll be waiting for the department to give you a formal approval, but as Drew mentioned earlier, you'll have a DEP IEC case manager, so there'll be some back and forth feedback. You'll be able to get some sort of recognition from the department that what you're moving forward with to satisfy these requirements are going to be acceptable. So specifically with vapor concern sites, to help you manage those conditions, there is on the DEP's website an interim vapor concern technical guidance document that sort of defines what this vapor concern condition is and the steps you need to take to satisfy those previously identified regulatory timeframes. The vapor intrusion guidance document, the revised version is out in draft form, and ultimately when that is finalized, that will replace the current VC tech guidance that the department has on their websites. As I mentioned, now these sites will have a DEP case manager, and they have their own specific response action forms. Talked about this earlier, but a quick recap. An IEC VI is an exceedance of a rapid action level. A VC condition for vapor intrusion is when you're sort of in between the indoor air screening level, you exceed that concentration, but you're less than the rapid action level. However, a couple other important distinctions for these VC cases: you do not have to call the DEP hotline when you identify this condition. There's no specific time frame for receptor delineation. You need to do that and work with the department to do that in an acceptable time frame, but there's some level of professional judgment that can be utilized to establish how quickly you need to complete that. Similarly, there's no time frame for your source control, but you need to submit this mitigation plan and implement that plan, and it's less onerous than what you have to do for an IEC condition, but essentially the components of what you need to do are similar. And as I mentioned, both of these IEC, BI IECs and vapor concern cases will have a DEP case manager. One of the biggest questions that we got when we were going through the guidance document from the commenters were, when am I done with this IEC condition? Does it ever end? And at this point, what the department's procedure is going to be is that the case is going to be closed out, quote unquote, in their database system. It's going to have a specific tracking component that'll be associated with your site, sort of a subset of time frames to track those regulatory time frames. And you'll be able to follow along as you go through the various regulatory timeframes and basic requirements of satisfying your IEC condition in the database. And at the end of the day, when you've completed, you've mitigated all your receptors, you have your mitigation systems in place, you've initiated your source control, you've satisfied all those requirements, your IEC case will essentially be, quote, closed out in the database. However, you're not going to get a formal letter saying, congratulations, your IEC is completed. And I know that that has caused some trepidation with folks, but at least for the time being, because it's not an official case, so to speak, within the department, it's linked to an existing site remediation matter. They're not going to be submitting letters out, but you will be able to go on to Data Miner, the IEC Case Manager. If you're not familiar with where this component of your case is going to be tracked, they can point you to where that is, and you can at least use that as documentation that you've satisfied all your requirements and that your IEC condition no longer is being considered active. This is when your IEC Case Manager involvement will cease. The LSRP and the responsible party will need to continue their monitoring and maintenance program that was previously submitted to the department as part of your source control report. And if there are any associated monitoring and maintenance reports that need to be submitted for your IEC condition, once the IEC condition is closed out, such as you're going to continue to run your subslab depressurization system or run your POET system, and you've got monitoring, that those reports, subsequent reports, whatever the frequency has been approved, will be submitted to the Bureau of Case Assignment, not to your IEC Case Manager. Ultimately, although it's not been established, the specifics have not been established yet, the department's plan is to have a monitoring and maintenance plan incorporated into the RAO. So there'll be a new permit that will be required if you have one of these conditions and at the time of your RAO you still have a monitoring and maintenance obligation that you need to continue. There's going to be a separate permit. This permit will be analogous to what is in the groundwater remedial action permit or soil remedial action permit, and there's some more details that will be coming out shortly on that. As of right now, that doesn't exist, but I think that that's something that the department is planning. So that takes us through the first part of the presentation materials this morning. I think we're going to take some questions online now.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. What we're going to do now is we're going to open up the question function. So please submit any questions, and we will pose them to the appropriate presenter. So we'll give it, and then followed after the 10 minutes of questions, we're just going to take a 10-minute break to allow those of you online who need to get something to drink or maybe visit a restroom to do so, and give the speakers just a break, and then we will come back in that 10 minutes and start again. So we'll just wait a few seconds here for some questions to come in. And if not, we're going to ask Drew to sing a little bit for us.
Oh, we've got a question.
All right, maybe not. We do have a question from Gloria Grant, and that question is, how is the case manager assigned if the VC is not called in?
Even though the VC is not called into the hotline, you will be submitting there is a VC remedial action form. You're going to submit that to the department, and that's where you'll include the data and some of the particulars about the VC case that was triggered. That's when the IEC case manager would be assigned. It's about 14 days.
Okay, we also have a question from Robert Ostreich. It says, I understand that all IECs must go LSRP. What if the condition, what if the condition is a result of a UHOT, which is unregulated homeowner tank, heating oil tank?
They would still need to have an LSRP.
Okay. Next question from Aaron Esteves. If a case number is assigned to the IEC, does the case number just go away when the source control report is submitted?
Well, the case, if you have an existing case, let's say you're working on a gas station and you trigger an IEC, you would not get a new case number. It would just be a component of that case. You would have an IEC component, so you wouldn't necessarily get a new case number just because you triggered an IEC.
Okay. Next one is from Robin Snyder, and it involves potable water IECs. It says, why is the groundwater remediation standard used instead of an MCL to trigger a potable water IEC?
We're using the groundwater remediation standards because they're more up to date. The MCLs have not been updated in I think it's probably about 15 years. So we have better data that's based on the groundwater remediation standards. That's why we're using those.
And I think the statutory authority for that was included in SARA, so that's part where that comes from.
Okay. Next question is from Renata Stasik, and if I'm annihilating your name there, I apologize. What are your responsibilities if you designed and installed a subslab depressurization system? However, the air sample results are still above the rapid action levels.
This is a situation where you really want to be in contact with your case manager. We do have situations where you got a strip mall, an active dry cleaner, the rental next to the dry cleaner was an IEC condition, and you may have two things going on. You may have PCE coming up through the slab, but also you have it coming from just the operation of the dry cleaner. You're going to want to talk to your case manager. There may be a situation where you've done everything you can do for the vapor intrusion, but there may be other sources. Every case is a little bit different. I would recommend that you talk with your case manager for that type of a situation.
And I would think in that condition, there are some times when you make some assumptions about how your subslab depressurization system is going to operate, and you install it, and there's some short circuiting somewhere, or something's just not quite right. I think as long as, and Drew can correct me if I'm wrong from the department's perspective, but as long as you're moving towards addressing the situation in a timely manner, I don't think there'll be a risk of non-compliance for your regulatory timeframes.
If you were to go out and put in a subslab depressurization system and you got your data back and you still are not meeting standards and you need to go out and do some modifications to the system, if that's something that's going to push you past a time frame, that would be a reasonable request for a time frame extension, that you have to do some modifications. Again, that's where it's important just to keep up the communications with your case manager so they know what's going on, and they can work with you. They really do not want you to exceed time frames in a situation like that.
Okay, next question is from John Trujillo. Sorry, John, if I mispronounced that. And that is, do we see the beginning of that question?
Yeah, actually on the gray on the bottom definition of an
Okay.
IEC.
Definition of an IEC indicates contamination at concentrations at or above remediation standards. The previous slide indicated contamination only, which is correct.
It's to trigger an IEC, it's an exceedance of a standard. It's not at or above. It's always going to be an exceedance.
Okay. Another one from Renata Stasik. Will applying for a permit by rule to conduct an in situ chemox considered initiation of source control?
When we're talking about initiating source control, we're actually talking about starting the source control. It would not be, doing the design for it. We actually want you to start removing source.
Okay. So basically, the applying for a permit does not satisfy that requirement.
No.
Okay.
But Drew, in an instance where you essentially moved forward with the submission of that permit before the time frame, but for whatever reason you're waiting for the department to issue that permit, and it could potentially affect your time frame, would you recommend that people request an extension in that condition?
I definitely would. I mean, there's situations where you're going to need permits for your remediation system, and just getting the permit alone might push you past your time frame. If you have if you have to start remediation within 1 year, and you put in for your permit, 11 months and 3 weeks, that's going to be an issue. But if you're making an honest effort, you did the design, you put in for the permit, but the permit's may take a couple months. That is something that would be a reasonable excuse for having an extension granted.
Okay, next question is from Gary Brown. It says, when the IEC source is product and there is a neighbor dispute as to the source, why does the department not assist to resolve the situation?
The department's position now is that if you have, let's say, a commingled plume, and you have two sites, each site has an LSRP, what we're saying is the two LSRPs, as professionals, should get together, figure out how they're going to remediate the contamination. We're not going to be stepping in between. in those cases.
Okay, next question is from Suzanne McHale Ferguson. It says, is it still an IEC if a potable well sample result exceeds a groundwater quality standard that is not health-based, for example, iron or manganese?
No, that would not be an IEC.
Okay, that was a quick one. I like that.
Yeah, those are good.
Next one's from John Graham. It says, time frame for delineation of an IEC source is 1 year. Time frame for receptor delineation is 60 days. How can you meet receptor delineation time frame if groundwater is not delineated yet?
What we're for IECs, we're calling it receptor delineation, which is different than a receptor evaluation. The idea behind doing a receptor delineation for an IEC is that we just want you to step out to the neighboring property, see if there's contamination. If it's a potable well case, you're sampling potable wells. For VI, you're doing VI samples. What we're not saying is put in monitor wells, delineate the plume, sample 100 feet beyond the plume. It's much more simple. In 60 days, you're stepping out a set distance to 100 feet for VI, sample the next home. So it's actually a simpler process than doing a receptor evaluation.
There's a potential for a scenario, I think, based upon how the question was asked, that you can satisfy your receptor delineation requirement, and then as you're finishing your site characterization for your delineation of groundwater, there may be potentially a scenario where you trigger the need to investigate a structure that hasn't been previously sampled as part of your remedial process. So you could reopen the door, God forbid, but the idea here, like Drew said, is if you're stepping out with the receptors, you should capture all those if there's any type of significant problem.
Okay, next question is from Kevin Donlin. What is the NJDEP response turnaround time on the extension letter rejections? Or at what time can you assume your extension has been granted?
Okay, again, you should be talking to your case manager. If you have something that you think you're going to be exceeding a time frame on, call your case manager. Again, if the time frame is in 60 days, you have to do something. Don't call us up in 59 days. I mean, you've already blown it. You need to submit it within 30 days. But work with your case manager. We've had cases come in where they requested a 6-month extension on a 60-day time frame. We didn't approve that. If there's a reasonable situation, if you need to get a permit, the permit's going to take 2 months, that's a reasonable justification. So, again, work with your case manager.
And I think also in that there are scenarios, particular with the initial IEC regulatory timeframes, where it may be difficult, or in some instances impossible, to submit an extension request that's legitimate 30 days before the time frame is up. I think what Drew is saying is if you have a scenario like that, then as long as you're communicating with your IEC case manager that you're moving forward and your extension is legitimate, I think even though you haven't satisfied that 30-day pre-extension date request, you still should be in a reasonably decent shape from a compliance standpoint.
Okay, next question is from John Bracken. Does an IEC exist if resampling results for indoor air are below the RALs?
In the guidance, we talked about resampling, and it's also the case for potable wells. If you go in, you take a sample, and you exceed a standard, you do have the ability to go out and take a confirmation sample. For groundwater, it's really pretty cut and dry. You go out, you sample, you just exceed the standard. You go out, take a second sample. In the guidance, we present a scenario where your second sample is below standards. Now you have one above, one below. The guidance recommends you go out, you take a third. Basically, best out of 3 is going to win. If you have 2 samples that exceed the standards, it's an IEC. If you have 2 below standards, it's not an IEC. In cases like that, what I would recommend is if you trigger an IEC based on your first sample, you're going to call the hotline. You're going to submit your 14-day report to the department. If you get data in the meantime where you show that additional sampling was done, it was not an IEC situation, again, call your case manager, explain this. What we'll do is we're going to go into our database. We can't delete that the information was sent in, but what we're going to put in the database is that the IEC was, in one way or another, we're going to show that the IEC is not active anymore. In a case like that, it would state that additional information showed that there was not an IEC condition.
Okay, next question is from Maria Vandezilber. As a case manager, what resources are available to verify that the monitoring and maintenance program that the LSRP has begun is appropriate? I.e., how often should the samples be collected, and how long will monitoring be required?
Okay, in the IEC guidance, there's actually a POET specifications. So if you put in a POET system, we have recommendations for how long you need to for the monitoring, both raw water and treated water. The new VIG has a section for monitoring, whether it's a passive system or an active system. How long you need to monitor for, particularly for a contaminated potable well, as long as that treatment system is on the home and you still have contaminated water that's being treated, you're going to continue monitoring and maintaining that system. Basically the same for VI. As long as you need it, there will be a monitoring and maintenance component.
Okay, we're just going to take 3 more questions, and then we're going to cut it off and take a 10-minute break. But the next question is from Gary Brown. What do we do when the DEP removes the case manager?
Well, if you have a BUST or ISRA case, couple things. I know that in some cases the RP is being recommended to hire an LSRP to take it over, but those cases where the BUS case manager has left for one reason or another, those cases are going to be transferred to the IEC group.
Okay, another question from Maria Vandezilber. If a vapor intrusion IEC condition has been verified, but the building is unoccupied, do the regulatory and mandatory timeframes still apply?
Yes, they do. Just because the building is vacant, you could still have an IEC condition. Your time frames still apply. But and we're going to get into this in the next talk. If you have a vacant building with an IEC, you still need to go through all the steps. However, for providing remediation, keeping the building vacant is actually a form of remediation. You're preventing people from being exposed, but you would need to do step-out sampling and address the source.
Okay, and this is going to be the last question we take right before we take a break, and it is from Joseph Jacobson. It says, what assistance will the department provide in the case where a potential receptor will not allow access to his or her property?
We run into the same problems with publicly funded cases. What we do is that we will contact them, we will send them letters. We usually send them multiple letters saying that, we want to sample your structure, just contamination in the area. And if they refuse, and this is really, we do this at the department to cover ourselves. LSRP should be doing this also. When that property owner refuses, I would send them one last letter saying that, we contacted you 3 times, offered you sampling, a treatment system, whatever it is, and that you denied it. And you send that certified mail. Because, and we have templates available for these letters, which I'll get into later. But if you have a record that you sent that letter to that homeowner, I'll guarantee at some point in your case that property owner is going to come back and say to you that you never contacted me, you never told me that I had contamination, you never told me that you would fix it. And if you can take that letter out and show it to them, it's going to be worth its weight in gold. So that's how I would handle a situation where you have a property owner who's not going to allow you to access to either sample or put a treatment system on.
Okay. Actually, we're going to take a break right now. I have a 10:48, so what we're going to do is just start at 11. I think that's a kind of a round time. Everyone can make it back. So again, we're going to sign off just for that time period. Please be back here at 11, and we'll start up again.
Okay, we're unmuted.
Okay, we're going to get started again. Thank you guys for being out there and participating. We certainly appreciate that. For the second part here, we have Drew who's going to give us a presentation on IEC resources. Also, we're going to have another question and answer period at the very end. And at that point, we will address the remaining two questions that we didn't get to at the end of the first one. And I just wanted to remind everyone on the webinar that if we do not get to your question, we can track that. We will make sure that the presenters see those questions and provide answers, and we'll email those answers back to you. So we just want to make sure that you understand that we'll do our best to answer your questions. So with that, I'll turn this over to Drew.
Okay, thanks, George. What I want to talk about are resources that are available to help the LSRP work through an IEC case. And the resources that are out there are listed here. And everything listed here you can find on the SRP website. I'm going to talk about the guidance library. That's where all the guidance documents are listed, the forms library, all the forms you're going to need for the program are listed there. I'm going to go through the spreadsheets, show you how they work. We also have samples of maps, give you an idea of the minimum that we're looking for mapping. We also have sample letters to property owners. There's a quick reference guide, and there's a contact list for the entire LSRP program. What I'm going to do is go through each one of these and show you where to find them, what they look like, and how to use them. If you go to the SRP website, this is what it's going to look like. Just to show you what's here, at the top left, there's an oval. It says SRP contacts. That's where you can get the contact list for the SRP, for the LSRP program. We listed names and phone numbers. If you have a question, you can pick the contacts there and give them a call. On the left side, we also have these green boxes. This is where you're going to find the guidance library, the forms library, and there's also some other things you could use like the training and tools. That's where you can find out if there's other guidance documents which are going to be scheduled for their presentations. We come over here to the right, there's a little figure of a person reading the newspaper. If you read what it actually says Sarah Quick Reference Guides. If you click on that, it'll take you to the reference guides. And then up at the top, there is a drop-down for other common topics. So this is from this website, you can get to all the information that I'm going to be talking about. Now for the guidance library, if you go to that, you're going to find the documents that you're going to need for working on an IEC. You'll find the IEC technical guidance document. There's also the interim VC technical guidance, and the VIG is listed there. One of the things to note is that the VIG is being revised right now. It's just about final. When that comes out, the new VIG will be listed in the guidance library. But the new VIG will also contain recommendations on how to handle VCs. And the VC technical guidance will be deleted because that will be included in the new VIG. In the guidance library, we also provided you the spreadsheets that you're going to submit. And there's also a granular activated carbon, or a GAC POET specifications. The department's been putting these systems on for over 20 years. We have standard POET specs. They're just dual canister carbon tanks. We got the specs and the schematics. This is what we give to treatment vendors all over the state to install treatment systems for us. It's there for you to use. If you run into one of these situations, you can use our specs. You don't need to design your own. And odds are, if you give it to a water treatment vendor, they've been used to seeing these specs. So you'll find all this at the guidance library. If you go to the website, click on guidance library, this is actually what it's going to look like. You'll have you're going to have the immediate environmental concern guidance. Below that, you got your POET specs, and we listed the spreadsheets for potable water, vapor intrusion, and we recently added a spreadsheet for direct contact. If you pull further down on this list, you'll find things like the VC guidance and the VIG. You will be submitting forms as you're dealing with IEC cases, and you can find all these forms in the forms library. There's the IEC response action form, the VC response action form, very similar to the IEC form, but it's only for VCs. You also need to submit a potable well indoor air sampling notification form before you go out and you do either potable or indoor air sampling. I think you have to notify us 14 days before you do that. The way that's done is you submit this form. There's a full laboratory data deliverable form. You need to submit any data related to an IEC to the department for a QA check. You do that by submitting it with this form. We also listed the IEC spreadsheets in the forms library a second time. And the last form you need is a remediation time extension request form. So you find all these in the forms library. This is what it looks like. So if you go there and you look, you'll have the IEC response action form, spreadsheets. Pull down a little bit more, you have your potable well indoor air sampling notification form. So any form you need is going to be listed at this location of the website. Now, as Mark was saying in his talk, one of the requirements is that you need to submit a spreadsheet to get the data into the department. And there are 3 spreadsheets. There's a potable well spreadsheet, a vapor intrusion, and a direct contact. Now, all these spreadsheets were recently revised. The direct contact was actually added. And for vapor intrusion, we actually changed the spreadsheet around a good bit. And with this new spreadsheet, you can report both IECs and vapor concerns on the same spreadsheet. This is what the spreadsheet looks like, and I'm just going to walk you through, show you what it looks like, how to fill it out, and the reason that we're asking for this spreadsheet is we wanted to come up with a way to get information into the department in a concise and simple format. And what we came up with is a spreadsheet. Your case manager needs to know where you've sampled, what the IEC condition is, how you're responding to that. That can all be shown in the spreadsheet. A couple things about the spreadsheet. It is an Excel spreadsheet. You can use all your regular Excel functions. If you need to add columns or rows, just add them. If you need to make a column wider, you can just grab the column and make it wider. It should go without saying, but some people have had problems that you do need to fill this in online. Please don't print it out and just fill it in pen and send it in. When you take a look at the spreadsheet, at the top, there's an area where you can put in the case name, the name of the LSRP, and the date that you're submitting this information. The first 2 columns is for property ID, and this is tied to your municipal lot and blocks. Everything gets keyed back to a block and lot. These first 2 columns are frozen, so no matter where you're looking at on the spreadsheet, your 2 left columns are always going to be the lot and block, so you can always tell what property you're looking at. The next section is property owner and occupant information. It's pretty self-explanatory, but we need to have the contact information for the owner or the tenant. Some of the things that were added in the spreadsheet, if you click on most of the cells, you will get a pop-up, and it tells you what we're looking for, what kind of information we want you to include. So if you were to click under name, the pop-up's going to tell you list the name of the occupant of the property first. If the property is leased, list the name of the property owner on the next line. So that's exactly the case that we have here at Lot 12, is that the first person is the occupant, and we have their contact information, and the second person listed is the owner of the property, and we have their mailing address. This spreadsheet is what we would expect to see when you first trigger an IEC. You're going to put in the IEC condition that you discovered. So in this case, you have contamination at Lot 12. If we scroll over to the next section on the sheet, this is where you're going to key in your analytical results. It's pretty simple. You're going to put in the date that you took the sample, the type of sample. I added a new column here, and you can put in reasons why you didn't sample at a property. Particularly when doing the receptor delineation, you need to step out, sample additional homes or wells. There are reasons why you can't take a sample there. It's a vacant lot, there is no response from the owner refused. In this area, you can key in that response. And then there are 3 contaminants of space for 3 contaminants of concern listed. If you have more, you can just add more columns and just cut and paste. What you will have here is if you click on this cell, you will get you're going to get a box which is going to tell you what to include. So select the contaminant of concern from the list. If not listed, you can type in the contaminant into the cell. Many of these cells, when you click on them, you're going to get a little arrow that indicates that there's a drop-down menu. You click on that, and then here you have a whole list of contaminants you can pick from. You click on that, and it'll just insert into the cell. You don't have to key in all that information. We tried to make this as simple as possible to fill out. Anywhere we could have drop-down selections, we provided them for you. We go further over on the spreadsheet. This is where you can tell us what interim response that you took. Now, this spreadsheet is for a potable well case. So in 5 days, you need to provide an interim response action. You can include the date that you provided it, what type of response, and who provided it. So what we know is you had an IEC at the location, and you went out, you provided bottled water, and it was provided by the responsible party. So at a glance, we can tell that the receptor has been provided some kind of immediate response. The next area over is the engineered system response action. Now this needs to be done in 60 days. This is where you can tell us what you did for that response. In here you can indicate the date, what kind of control. In this case, a poet was installed. The type of poet was a GAC, and we have the monitoring schedule that's going to be sampled 4 times a year and the raw water once a year. If we go over to the last section of the spreadsheet, it's mapping information. What we're looking for here are for the XY coordinates or state plane coordinates. You're going to insert that information into these areas. There's also a column for IECs. You need to indicate for the individual lot, do you have an IEC condition or not? Because when you do a receptor delineation, you're going to step out, sample additional structures or wells. Not all those structures will be contaminated, hopefully. You will be listing all the information, even if it's non-detect. And here's where you can indicate whether it's an IEC condition or not. One of the things with this mapping information, we need this because all of these IEC cases will be mapped into the GIS system. We want to get that information in as soon as possible. In your 120-day report, you need to either submit a GIS-compatible map to the department, and we will load that in. You can go to our website, go to the guidance for creating a GIS map, create your map, send it in. Or you can send in the spreadsheet. In the guidance, there's directions on how to just email the spreadsheet to the department's GIS people, and they can take this data that's listed here, your XY coordinates, and they will plot it. And they'll show, based on whether it's an IEC or not, if it's an IEC condition. So it's a nice function of the spreadsheet. When you fill it out, you can actually just send it in. You don't have to do the mapping yourself. The department can do it for you. So this is what the spreadsheet would look like. All the spreadsheets are very similar. They all work the same way. They all have drop-down menus. And one of the reasons we want to use a spreadsheet is we want to try to make getting the data into the department as simple as possible. If you're going through, you're working on a case, you do additional samples, you would just keep on adding information to the spreadsheet, sending it into your case manager. So as Mark was saying, it's really an iterative process. It's a quick way to summarize it. We really do not want the LSRP to be writing up big, thick RI type reports and sending it to the department to inform us what's going on. The spreadsheet has a lot of that information. It's a simple way to transmit it to the department. This is this is for the same case, and if you take a look at this, one thing you notice right at a glance, additional samples were taken. We look down here. We have what, 4 or 5 more properties that were sampled. We have all their information. So what we want to know is, what was the result of that sampling? So we take a look down at lot 13. We can look across. We have PCE contamination. It's at 21 parts per billion. That exceeds the groundwater remediation standard. So we know we have a new IEC at this location. Down at lot 14, come across PCE 0.6. That's below the groundwater remediation standards. Lot 15, non-detect. So neither of these are IECs. And we come down to lot 10. We don't see any data keyed in. But what we can see here is that it's a vacant lot. So just by putting that in there, we wouldn't expect any sampling to be done on that property. Come back up to our original property at lot 12 where we had a problem, and we can see that there was another sample that was taken. The type of sample is a post-installation sample. This is a sample that you would take after the treatment system is installed. The PCE was non-detect, exactly what it should be after you install a treatment system. So just by looking at this one section of the page, we can tell that we have a new IEC condition and that our original property with the IEC was addressed. Now, if we want to know how that property was addressed, we pull over to the next slide. Go up to lot 12, come across for the engineered system response. On the 15th, a POA was installed. It was the GAC POA, and we got the scheduled monitor. Now, we also had an IEC at lot 13. Okay, was an interim response done? Yes, it was. On the second, bottled water was provided. So we just went through looking at 6 properties, sampling that was done. We know that the interim response actions were taken. We know that our initial case was addressed with the engineered response system. This was all done in the matter of just a couple minutes. This is why we want to use the spreadsheet. When you send this to your case manager, it's easy for them to look at this. They get the picture real quick. Remember, the IEC case manager is direct billing you. If they have to go through a thick report, you're talking about hours versus minutes. As we scroll over, we have the mapping information. This is what would be sent to the GIS group. Again, they're going to pick off the XY coordinates, whether it's an IEC or not, and they can plot that right in the GIS system. The reason it's being plotted in our GIS system is that there are people who look at that to see if there's contamination in the area. We have folks who are thinking about buying a property. They look at that website all the time. Other LSRPs who want to see is there other contamination in the area that may be causing them a problem. They go to the GIS system. So it does need to be updated as soon as possible, and we can do it through this spreadsheet. And the last column here is comments. This is anything that you want to tell us. If you want to be more detailed about what you found, this is a space where you can add that. So that's what the spreadsheet looks like. That's how it works. Just remember, you got drop downs and help menus there. One of the other resources that are available, we included this in the IEC guidance, is that there's samples of maps. And we're specifying the minimum requirements for an IEC map. We also provided maps which depict how to do a receptor delineation. And then finally, there's 2 maps that show how to delineate a currently known extent map. Now, that would only be for potable well cases. I'm going to go through, going to show you what these maps look like. First is the IEC sample map. In the guidance, we tell you what the minimum specifications for a map is. We want a map which is a municipal lot and block map. We want all the lots and blocks clearly labeled, the streets labeled. In the bottom here, we're going to have a title block with the name of the case, the LSRP, and the date. We're also going to have a scale. You're going to have a symbol which is going to show us what the site is, which is this property right on the corner. And then we recommend some simple symbols for showing whether it's an IEC or not. A black circle would indicate that it's an IEC. A half-shaded circle would be contaminants were detected, but they were below standards, and an open circle like this one is non-detect. It's a simple way of just showing us where the problem is and where it's not. One of the things to keep in mind when you do samples, we want to see both the contaminated and the clean samples. It's just as important to know where the contamination is as where it is not. So you will be showing all the samples that you take as part of the receptor delineation. For many of the LSRPs, they're submitting CAD-type maps where they're representing the lot and blocks, and they have off to the side, they have boxes where they have the data included in it. That's great. Keep on doing that. They're great maps. The reason we're specifying this as a minimum requirement is that we were getting in maps that were just Google Air Photo maps with a couple dots. They're not very useful. They're hard to use. And this map with the lot and blocks actually keys in with the spreadsheet, which is keyed to lot and blocks. So it's very easy to see what's going on. You can compare both the spreadsheet and the map. So that's the minimum requirements for mapping. And for the receptor delineation, we wanted to show you the process because there's some people are confused about that. So this would be your first map, and what we're showing here is you have a site. A sample was taken at lot 12,